Welcome to Planet People, a podcast that aims to inspire curiosity and cultivate a deeper connection with the natural world.
We are thrilled to be sharing stories with you that highlight the beauty and importance of protecting our planet's wildlife.
Be sure to follow us on social media and your favorite podcast streaming platform so that you never miss an episode.
Hello, hello, hello. Hi, Planet People. Hi, Natalie.
What's up, Coral? And hey, everybody. Welcome back to our spooky season series. We are so excited for this episode release with an entomologist, Scott. He is a researcher at Riverside University, and he studies insects.
All the creepy crawlers, and we definitely get into that today. And we walk away feeling a little more, well, I walked away feeling a little more excited about bugs and insects because I definitely start this interview not really loving them. But I have a newfound respect for all of the creepy crawlers and all of the importance and what they do. And even if they don't necessarily do something important that we know about, they should have the right to exist as well as us.
That seems to be another prominent theme in this episode, where it reminds me a little bit of Colin Barrow's ethos to understanding nature and every being's purpose, and that it doesn't totally matter what their role in like the ecological food chain is, just that they simply are there because they're there. The same thing applies to insects. So I felt like there was some parallel there for sure between Colin and Scott's take on studying just the environment from a biological and naturalistic perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And what I love about this episode and all of our episodes in October is that we kind of highlight spookier animals and creatures. So, we started the month off strong with Danielle Wall, the snake wrangler of Joshua Tree, and we cover all things snakes. And then we talk about ravens and desert tortoises, but mainly ravens being the spooky one with Tim and Katie. And now here we are diving into all things insects, creepy, crawly, zombie.
Right?
And then we'll have a special little episode too the following week for Halloween. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, I guess by the time you listen to Scott's episode, we'll have already released Katie Shaw and Tim Shields' episode all about, yes, the desert tortoise, raven, social ecological issue that whole threat to tortoises really is because of ravens and humans. It's like this three-pronged effect. And so be sure to listen to those episodes if you haven't, because they really are the crux of this season, and the desert tortoise is such a major highlight. So be sure to check those episodes out, and we hope you guys love Scott's episode and feel inspired by this spooky season and all things insects. I mean, we took a wild turn in this episode. I learned so much.
So what is your breath of fresh air as it relates to insects today?
My breath of fresh air for this episode was probably learning about the Jerusalem crickets and how they're just a unique type of insect and often sought after as a pet. And so I feel like that was really interesting to me that an insect, like a cricket, which I was always fearful of as a child, could be described as like just a unique, characterable pet to have around that's personable, like as a bug. So I thought that was kind of like refreshing to like have a different perspective about the fact that an insect would be considered a good bug.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm going to piggyback off of that and say that my breath of fresh air, it also relates to a cricket. Since this episode, and honestly, since Danielle Wall's episode with snakes, I've just kind of come away with less of a freak out energy when I see these things. So there are a lot of crickets out in my backyard porch area, and sometimes they get into my art studio. And before I would have like like, oh my God, get away from me, get out of here. But after this episode, I noticed that whenever I saw them, I was just like, whatever. Like he can be in here if he wants. So
Oh my God.
kind of seeing my own behavior change after having this interview with Scott and learning more about the crickets and all the other bugs.
Well, it comes back to that quote that I love and hold close to my heart that the only difference between fear and beauty is knowledge. We talk about that in our episode with Danielle about snakes, and that oftentimes people misperceive snakes and fear them because they just don't have a solid knowledge base about their beauty and how they have their own role here, their own right to exist, and that they're actually harmless unless you strike first, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I feel like the same thing applies with insects. And while I was deeply terrified of crickets as a child and spiders, I have come a very long way. And I no longer fear spiders, and I actually seek out tarantulas sometimes in the desert. And that'll be another fun topic of discussion for this month. And in this episode, we talk a little bit about tarantulas. So
Yeah.
again, just knowing that difference between fear and beauty it comes back to knowledge. So
Yeah. I actually had a moment with a spider not long after we recorded this episode, and I had this huge spider in my car. And I was really, really, really trying to like get it out without harming it, but then it just RIP to that spider because it just didn't work out for him that day. But I did try, so I'm giving myself a pat on the back for that.
there you go.
Yeah.
I just let the spiders live in the corner of my desk and above my front door, and they just live there.
Well, and they keep out like other unwanted bugs in the house, so
Spiders are
yeah.
good for natural pest removal. They eat bugs.
Although we learned that spiders are not technically insects
It's also true.
in this episode. So stay tuned as you hear more about spiders in this episode and tarantulas specifically.
Totally. Well, we hope you guys enjoy this episode as much as we did learning from Scott. There's really so much to learn about insects, and you'll be amazed at how many different types there are and the creepy crawly theme that comes out of it for this month. We hope you guys enjoy. Hey, Planet people, welcome back to the show. We're so excited to be introducing Scott Heacox today on the show. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And today, I just want to show if you're watching this video podcast and if you're listening, I'm wearing an insect shirt that I just thrifted. So I'm going to show everyone. And that is because Scott is an entomologist, which I am just now learning is the name for someone that studies insects. Yeah, Scott, could you tell us a little bit about your exact position and all of the studies that you do?
Yeah, sure. Currently, I work for University of California, Riverside, Center for Conservation Biology Department. And we're a little different than many of the others in that department in that we are based completely in the Coachella Valley in Palm Desert, which is way down the southern end of California. And because we're down in the desert, obviously we focus almost exclusively on desert ecology and desert conservation issues. So before my current position, I went to school at UC Riverside and did their undergraduate entomology degree. And while I was a student, and shortly thereafter, after I graduated, I worked in a entomology lab that focused on parasitic wasps or parasitoid wasps. And I can talk more about the differentiation between a parasitoid and a parasite later. But that, I knew obviously going into that I loved insects, but this really solidified my love for insects, just how much I learned about this very bizarre and strange group of insects. And so I took that entomology knowledge into my current job. And that's actually one of the reasons why they wanted me there is because my office had never had a dedicated entomologist before. And I could bring those skills into an area that does have, an insect conservation concerns. There's a handful of protected species in the area, including one federally endangered species.
Hmm.
And
What species is that?
The federally endangered one is the Casey's June beetle, Deinocoma casei, and it's basically found just essentially just in one little wash in Palm Springs.
Wow.
And so you can imagine that, any amount of encroachment into that wash or altering of the flood regime or something could just wipe it out.
Mm.
Um,
So what is a wash? Like when you say
right.
wash?
Yeah. A wash is a pretty common term to use for, desert ecologists, maybe not so much elsewhere, but a wash is an area in the desert that occasionally floods if there's like a, torrential downpour during a monsoon storm or something, but is otherwise usually dry. And
Mm.
usually you find washes at, low parts of a valley or a canyon or something. They're usually sandy and they might have a unique plant assemblage that goes along with that additional little bit of extra moisture. And so there's a variety of plants and animals that, really rely on washes in particular. Um, they're just adapted to that certain, microclimate, the certain microclimates you can find associated with washes. And a lot of times because they do flood, when developments are going in, the developers will alter, potentially just completely change the course of that wash because they don't want their developments flooding. And that can be really bad for the things that require those washes. Uh,
Mm.
and unfortunately, fortunately, the June beetle is protected. That's the good news. The other good news is that it seems to be doing fine.
Hmm.
It's just really scary when something is in such a tiny area because, one relatively small thing could happen and that area is, you know, drastically altered. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
good news is that it is protected.
that's amazing that it's protected. Why I'm personally really excited to have you on is because I think the general consensus is that nobody really likes insects.
Speak for
Well,
yourself, Coral.
well, unless you're like an entomologist or bio, like I feel like the general public like don't really
Yeah.
fuck with insects like that. Me included. I mean, if there's a bug in my house, like I think I've surrounded myself with biologists enough that, I'm not too scared of these things anymore, but
Mhm.
I think we've all seen like the big freak out videos of like an insect is in your house or like on your hair or anything, like people freak out and they're not happy about it. So I'm excited to see if this conversation will allow me to change my opinion and other people listening as well. So with that, like I would love to know, why these things should be protected on like a federal level, and what they're kind of contributing and why they're so important. So like specifically with the beetle that is federally protected, like why is that necessary? What did they do in the environment that like, you know, makes it so that they need to be protected?
Yeah. So, a lot of that can get into the fairly philosophical, which I'm happy to go there as well. But yeah, you're exactly right in that many people don't have a great fondness for insects. And I usually say, when I'm talking to a general audience that my goal isn't to get people to love insects. That's very hard. Some people definitely do come away loving insects, and that's great. What I try to do is get people to respect and understand insects. So if I can even get a little bit of respect going in their minds, then I consider that a success. Because many people don't even have that. They think, like you said, that insects are just a nuisance and what's their point? We should just get rid of all of them. Uh,
Hmm.
And what do you say to people when they are like, what's the point of these animals? Why do we need
yeah.
them?
Well, I strongly believe that in order to get people to respect something, they have to understand it. And so my first instinct is to tell them about insects because these people are often lacking knowledge about what an insect even is. Um, one thing that I like to tell them that really blows many people's minds and might not be that surprising, but actually putting numbers on it can be pretty shocking. Insects are by a wide margin the most diverse um, creature outside of maybe microbes and bacteria on this planet. They're as a group, they're more diverse than all of plants and far more diverse than mammals. That's for sure. I think mammals, there's maybe 5,500 described species in the world. And there's probably a handful more that we haven't described yet as scientists. So that number might go up or down a little bit as we learn more, but pretty close to 5,500, you can be pretty confident. Insects, there's so many of them, we don't even have a really good estimate of how many species are out there. One fairly conservative estimate is somewhere around 5.5 million
Oh,
species.
wow. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
quite a
So,
vast difference.
and basically found everywhere on the earth, except some of the most maybe extreme areas and not in the ocean, strangely.
I was
Um,
just gonna ask if there's technically insects in the ocean or like
so
things that
there,
are like insects in the ocean.
there technically are, but not nearly as significant as on terrestrial and freshwater environments. So the one that I always think of, and this kind of straddles the line between, is an actual organism or not. There's a water strider, which you've probably seen if you go to like a park pond or something, little guys that scurry across the water surface. There's a species of those in the genus Halobates that lives just out in the ocean in tropical climates, in the middle of the Pacific. Their entire lives, they will never see anything even remotely close to land.
Oh wow.
So
That's
there are,
fascinating.
and along shorelines and stuff, you might get some stronger insect influence, but definitely deep down in the ocean, there's a notable lack of insects. There are, of course, arthropods, like things like crabs and shrimps and isopods and things like that, that are evolutionarily speaking, relatively closely related to insects. But um, insects really establish themselves as the rulers of freshwater and terrestrial environments.
In
Uh,
those freshwater, what did you call them? The ones that scan the water
the
surface?
water striders or pond striders, yeah,
Water striders. In my head, I've always called those like water spiders because they kind
yeah,
of look
they do
like,
look pretty spidery.
They
Yeah,
do look spidery, so they are not spiders, though.
they're not. Yeah,
Oh,
that's the problem with common names. So things like a pond strider or water strider or water spider, those are all common names. Um, is that they vary from, you know, culture to culture and from location to location, and things can get a little confusing taxonomically.
yeah.
Uh, I try to use as good of a common name as I can without actually dipping into, the Latin names because that gets very cumbersome very quickly.
well,
Uh,
that's where it gets confusing for the
right,
layperson to
right,
understand. And
exactly. Yeah,
even as a biologist, I mostly specialize in ornithology and herpetology. But when I go in the field with other botanists and they're just dropping a ton of Latin names, like
yeah,
I can
yeah,
kind of follow because I know my rare desert plants and coastal sage scrub, chaparral, all of that. But when you start bringing out every Latin name, I'm like,
yeah.
okay, I can't even follow that.
And it does get really tough in entomology when you're trying to teach the public about this because there's so many species of insects that the majority of them don't have common names. So sometimes I have to kind of make up one
Mm, that's
that'll stick
funny.
in people's heads.
Yeah.
Or hopefully I just like, a lot of times when I do education events, I either try to bring actual animals that I release afterwards
Oh,
or
that's cool.
show them pictures. So at least they have some kind of, mental connection instead of a very cumbersome Latin name that they're not going to remember.
Yeah.
Um,
So let's go wider to start. So insects in the desert, like how many would you say are in the Coachella Valley if you know? And what type of insects are we able to see in the Coachella Valley?
yeah. So that's a good and interesting question is how many insects are in X area? The short answer is we don't actually know because there's so many different species and, there's probably undescribed species pretty much anywhere if you look hard enough. Very cryptic things, species that might look like another species. And so they're lumped in the same group, but they're actually not when you look at their behavior and their genetics and all that. It gets very complicated very quick. Um, but if you go onto iNaturalist, I'm assuming everybody here is familiar with iNaturalist. It's pretty awesome. And you just draw a little box around the Coachella Valley. It comes up with, I think, over 3,000 species.
Okay.
Um,
It's a lot.
and again, that's, it's not the exact actual number, but it tells the right story in that there's a lot out there. There's thousands. Down in the Algodones Dunes, which is a really amazing spot biologically down by the Mexican border. There's a really uh, detailed entomology study of that area, just documenting species, and they came up just shy of 2,000 species for just that area.
Wow.
So there's a lot out there. The exact number nobody knows, but there's hundreds or thousands.
What would be the most common species that people would recognize, like maybe top 5 to 10?
Um, yeah, so ants, of course, which are one of my personal favorites. In the desert and many places in California and the Southwest in general, ants are everywhere. You get large ones, small ones. Sometimes they come into your house. Sometimes they stay outside. Sometimes they sting painfully. Um, but they are really important to desert ecosystems, including the Coachella Valley and beyond desert ecosystems. Um, there's bees. Everybody knows bees. I'm not talking about European honeybee, which is technically an invasive species. They're not from here. We brought them over for agricultural purposes, and then they just went everywhere. The desert and all kinds of other, habitats in the world have a huge assortment of native bee species that are often overlooked because everybody focuses on the honeybee.
Hmm.
It's not to say honeybees don't have utility. We need them for agriculture, but they unfortunately can cause a lot of damage, both actually in the sense that they compete with native bees
Oh.
and more, I guess, socially in the sense that they take a lot of attention away from native bees that do need conservation help.
There's some of the desert native bees.
There's all different kinds. Let me think of one to focus on. Um, I mean, one of my favorite they're called resin bees or pebble bees, and they're really adorable because they're solitary bees. Most of the native bees that we have are solitary. They don't form hives. Um, they're really cute because they make their little nests, which are maybe no bigger than, the size of a coin, out of little pebbles that they assemble like a little mason. Looks like a little brick wall.
So when you say they're solo bees, like it's just the individual, like they don't have a
Mhm.
hive.
They don't have a hive. Basically, it's, a female flies around, it mates with a male, and then it constructs a single nest to house, um, its young, and it'll potentially make many different nests. But they don't have a centralized hive like honeybees do, or, yellow jackets or hornets or something like that.
So would you say most of the desert native bee species is this like solo type of behavior?
Yeah, I'd be willing to say that most bee species in the world are solitary, and that actually goes for wasps too.
I didn't even
It's
know
just
that.
again, because everybody's familiar with the honeybee, which is a social species, um, and things like yellow jackets and things that sting you and things that you're raised to be very afraid of. We associate all bees and wasps with a certain lifestyle that isn't necessarily true. And it gets really complicated with wasps when you start mixing in like parasites and parasitoids and that kind of thing.
Well, and to your point about parasitoid wasps, I feel like this is the perfect lead-in to ask you about the tarantula hawk.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Tell me
So,
about it. You sound like lackluster, like, oh, the
oh
tarantula
no,
hawk.
no. It's because it's a fun topic, depending on who you're talking to, because it gets uh pretty creepy. You can tell that a lot of horror stories and like sci-fi and horror sci-fi stories occasionally draw a lot of inspiration from parasitic wasps because of how gruesome they are. Um,
So this is a type of wasp.
yes, and you can find them they're pretty common in the deserts. You can find them outside of deserts too, basically wherever there are tarantulas. And it's a solitary wasp, so they don't form hives. And basically what they do is they require a tarantula in order to feed its young. And it sounds like, how do you get that to work out? Basically, they hunt down tarantulas, and the females will sting the tarantula in a certain way that it'll paralyze it, not kill it. And then they will bring it back to a hole that the wasp dug in the ground, stuff it in there, and then they'll lay eggs on top of the still alive tarantula. And that way, when the eggs hatch, they have a very fresh food source to eat and grow big and strong on. So being an arthropod, being an insect or a spider is pretty scary. There's a lot of things out there that want to do very horrible things to you, and parasitic wasps are masters of that.
So is
Um,
the tarantula hawk a parasitic wasp? And then you said there's a difference between that and the
yeah.
parasitoid.
So I think a lot of people would actually consider a tarantula hawk to be a type of predator.
That's
Um,
crazy.
yeah. And by the way, tarantula hawks, tarantulas are big, so the tarantula hawks themselves are gigantic. And many people know what they are simply because they're pretty hard to miss when they're flying by.
Well, and they have that loud sound as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Like when there's a few of them together, it is quite the soundscape on an
right.
otherwise silent desert landscape.
Yeah. And that's
Hold
also,
on. Hold on. I'm in shock right now. Okay.
okay.
This
This,
is the hawk that I was telling you about, Coral, that people were freaking out about, the Rachel the tarantula hawk.
yeah.
This is the wasp that I was filming and I was talking about it. And people were freaking out because they're like, oh, this is the hawk that literally preys on a tarantula while it's
Mhm.
alive, paralyzing it, and then laying its babies inside, and the babies eat the tarantula while it's alive, right? Scott, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
That's psychotic. That is
Well,
crazy.
if you think that's bad, then I've got some stories
Okay.
for you about
But
other
hold
species.
on. I just want to break this down. So the wasp only exists because tarantulas exist. Like
Uh,
if there weren't tarantulas, it wouldn't like this is a like they
right.
go together sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, and
Unfortunately, to the tarantula, it seems like. So they literally paralyze the tarantula. So the tarantula is alive during this entire process of then being used
correct.
as a vessel for eggs and then eaten alive. That is so crazy.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like I said, when you think about it, it's gruesome, but it's pretty clever, right? The wasp wants to lay its eggs and it wants to know that its young have a nice, fresh, nutritious food source. And so, what better way to do that than to provide them a live tarantula?
Well, and what about the sting of a tarantula hawk
Oh, yeah.
on a human? That's
So, I'm
what
glad you
seems to
brought
freak
that up.
people out the
Yeah,
most.
I'm glad you brought that up. First thing is that I've never been stung, thankfully. Um, And just a fun little fact, only females can sting. And that goes for ants, bees, and wasps.
I
Only
did not
females can
know
sting
that about.
because the stinger is actually a modified egg-laying apparatus. So obviously males don't have egg-laying apparatuses,
And what are you saying? Eggling? App.
egg-laying. So
Oh, egg laying.
yeah,
Okay.
it's called an ovipositor. Not to get too technical, but basically, many insects have a special structure, like a sharp point or something that they can use to stick into something they want to lay their eggs into, kind of like a syringe, and then they pump the eggs through that. Um, that's essentially what a stinger is, and except it can also deliver venom if needed. Um, but tarantula hawks are known to be very high up on the pain scale. There's a gentleman named Justin Schmidt who, a researcher, he wasn't just some crazy guy that, I mean, he maybe is a little bit crazy, but very cool guy. I've listened to one of his, uh, and unfortunately he's passed away now, but back when he was alive, I listened to one of his educational talks. Very cool and very passionate. But he took it upon himself to rate the painfulness of all kinds of different stings. And if I recall, the tarantula hawk was very, very high up on the list. So you don't want to get stung by one. The good news is that they are not aggressive. These are solitary wasps. That aggression in wasps and bees and ants is normally associated with nest defense behavior. Um, these don't have a nest to defend, and so they're naturally not as aggressive. Now, that doesn't mean you can't get stung by one. If you were, to grab it in your hand, which please don't do that, it will try to defend itself by stinging you. If it somehow accidentally flies down your shirt or something, it's going to become afraid that it's trapped and it might try to sting you. Um,
And would you
but
get paralyzed?
No, 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 no. That only works on tarantulas. You'll just get a very, very painful memory.
Wow.
Um, as far as I know, unless you're allergic, in which case it potentially could be life-threatening if you're
That would
allergic to
be bad if
insect
you were
venom.
allergic to
Yeah.
that.
Otherwise, you should be fine.
If you're allergic to, I maybe you wouldn't know this because it's more of like a doctor question, but if you're allergic to bees,
Mhm.
would you be allergic to something like this type of wasp sting? Probably.
Um, I'm not a doctor, so please
Right.
don't
Yeah.
take my doctor advice, but it would be my concern that yes, you could have some sort of
Like going to anaphylactic
similar.
shock.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I regularly, when I'm bringing new people out, I ask them just in general, do you have any reactions to insect venom? Not necessarily just to honeybees, because there are lots of stinging things out there that could potentially produce an allergic reaction.
Are there scorpions in the Southern California deserts?
There are many of them,
Many,
yes,
many.
um, including the Arizona bark scorpion, which you may have heard of, that is very venomous, potentially medically significantly venomous, that has moved into the Indio area in the Coachella
Okay.
Valley that isn't supposed to be there. It's supposed to be out in Arizona. So that's something you need to look out for. But otherwise, there are all kinds of native species. There's dune scorpion, giant desert hairy scorpions. Um,
Those are the
and
cool ones.
yeah, they are pretty cool. They do get big, so they
They
frighten
get pretty
people.
big.
Yeah,
Like,
but they these ones again, unless you're allergic, they don't really pose a threat to humans. It might just be like a normal bee sting if you do get stung. Um,
So if you were to be stung by a scorpion, it wouldn't be a big deal, except for some of them, maybe.
unless you're allergic, yeah, it would be something that would be irritating for a few minutes, and then you'll probably forget about it.
how would you rate the pain difference between a scorpion and a tarantula hawk?
Oh, well, I've never been stung by either, fortunately. So I couldn't personally say, but I would, if you're talking about our scorpions minus the bark scorpion, I think the tarantula hawk would be much greater, much more painful.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people seem to be very afraid of those
Hmm.
wasps. I was sharing about a tarantula hawk experience I had when I was in the field, and I had just posted a video of it online. And I got thousands and thousands and thousands of comments about people's like slight encounter with them and how they were terrified. Or, oh, Coyote Peterson said this was number two most
Right.
painful
Yeah.
insect on the world. Like, I saw this on TV. Oh, it's in my backyard. I'm so scared. Like, what should I do? People really are terrified
Hmm.
of like stinging insects.
So if they're considered the number two, what's the number one?
Bullet ants? What would
I,
you say, Scott?
I think I actually have been stung by a bullet ant when I was in Costa Rica.
Oh
Um,
shit.
I can attest it was a very unpleasant experience. It lasted several days.
Oh
Um,
no.
but
Oh,
I
what did it
think
feel like?
it was immediate pain, and it was unfortunately it had gotten down my mud boot and stung my calf, and immediate searing pain that lasted for at least a few days, and my calf swelled up like the
Oh
entire
my God,
lower
Scott.
leg, and made it at times difficult to get my mud boots on. Um, yeah, I don't recommend it.
Yikes. I
Don't
have
don't do it for internet points. Don't do it for fun.
internet points. That's funny.
Yeah.
I've encountered both. I've seen several bullet ants when I was
Mhm.
doing a bird internship in Costa Rica. And the flying bullet ants, anytime they would come in through the treehouse kitchen, we'd grab the spatula, a cup, and immediately like, all right, we
Yeah.
gotta remove this animal
Yeah.
ASAP.
I don't blame you for that.
Are
And
there
we were
black?
more afraid of the bullet ant than the giant anaconda in the outhouse that
Oh yeah.
I happened to walk in to see coiled up in the bathroom.
That's a intriguing story.
Yeah, that was
I'm
crazy
happy to
too.
say I didn't have that experience when I was in Costa Rica.
It's better that way, but it's funny. I feel like when you go into places like Costa Rica or Ecuador into the jungle, you have to be more weary of insects than of like mammals or snakes, I would say.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you have things like army ants, which are a true force of nature if you've seen those in the wild.
I have.
You
It's
know, you
impressive.
if they're coming toward you or you encounter them, you get out of their way. There's nothing you can do about it.
I love that. Such a force of nature for
Yeah.
being so small and mighty.
Hmm.
The perfect opportunity. So we're doing this segment on the show now called Freak or Force, and
Oh
we're
yeah,
identifying whether we think it's a freak of nature or a force of nature. So you're saying these army ants are a huge force of nature, and why?
definitely. Yeah, for
Well,
army
two
ants.
questions. Three questions. Are there bullet ants and army ants in the Coachella Valley?
There are not bullet ants. And as far as I know, there's not even a close relative to bullet ants, so you don't have to worry about that.
That's a South
Those are more,
American thing.
yeah, more tropical. Um, Army ants. So the type of army ants you see in nature documentaries, the ones I was describing in Costa Rica, we do not have that species, but we do have desert army ant species in a different genus.
And what's the
They do
difference?
very similar things. Sorry, what?
What are the difference, but what's the difference between the desert army ants and then the army ants you were referring to in Costa Rica?
Well, besides taxonomy and morphology, the ones we have are smaller, which is probably a good thing for most people. Um, the main thing is that our army ants are very cryptic. Actually, you rarely see them unless they're going on a big raid or they're relocating their nest to a new spot. Um, Spend most of their time underground, and occasionally you might be able to see them at night. Whereas the tropical army ants are active during the day. They have much bigger colonies, just I think millions potentially of individuals active at a time, much bigger ants. So they're much easier to spot. But otherwise, they do a lot of similar things. They raid other ants as their main source of food, and they move from spot to spot, kind of like an army picking up their gear and moving to a different spot. They call it a bivouac, like they do in the military. When you set up a camp somewhere, it's called bivouacking.
And why would you say that they're a force of nature versus a freak?
Can they be both? I mean, I feel like
Yes.
many insects fall into both those categories. Um, I think they're a force of nature because they will, there are many species that have evolved just, specific behaviors just to keep themselves safe from army ants. And there's one I can't unfortunately I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but there is one very little cute ant that lives in the side of muddy riverbanks. Small colonies, maybe 100 workers or so, um, and they have this very interesting defense from army ants. They make one little opening to the nest, and that's it. And they have a little ring of mud around the entrance. And as soon as they get the scent of an army ant, they grab a pebble and they plug it. And that's to keep the army ants from raiding their colony. And so that pretty much all other ant species have a similar reaction, just like, oh my goodness, I got to get out of here. Um, as soon as they sense an army ant, and ants communicate by scent, essentially by different pheromones and stuff, so they can pick up these chemicals from even other ant colonies. As soon as they get even a whiff of an army ant, they
Mm.
will grab all their young. They'll get the queen and they'll just book it. Um, and so when very specific behaviors like that have evolved alongside an organism, that organism must exert significant pressure on the things around it. There's even there's even birds called ant birds that have evolved to follow the raiding trails of army ants and pick off things that the army ants scare away from it. Everything will run away from army ants. It doesn't matter what you are,
Including humans.
including humans. Yes, please run away from them if you're unlucky enough to get in their path.
Why?
Oh, they sting, they bite, they are aggressive. They're out looking for food. There's potentially, hundreds of thousands of them that you could be swarmed with immediately. It's just not something you want to mess with.
No, army ants are deadly. When
Yeah.
that in that same internship when I was in Ecuador, we were mist netting for birds. And there were times where we would have to completely close down the mist nets because army ants were raiding up the sides of the poles and going into the net. And if there was a bird in the net, right, that we have to extract carefully and with gloves and all that, then we would have to make sure we take them out and close the nets because those ants, if a bird is still, I
They'll
Mhm.
feel
eat
like,
the bird.
I mean, they'll attack it. Yeah.
They'll go for whatever is in their path. They really like raiding other ant colonies, especially leafcutter ants, which are a big, yet another, multi-million worker colony type of ant. Um, I've witnessed the aftermath of wars between the two, and it's not pretty.
What does it look like?
Basically, just thousands of mangled individuals from both species on this like empty battlefield.
Damn.
Um, so the leafcutter ants are probably one of the few ants that will actually put up a fight because if you don't, then they're gone. They're toast. They'll get raided.
The secret life of ants.
Yeah, there's ants are. I can do a whole podcast just on ants. They're so bizarre, just on one species of ant for that matter. But um, an African equivalent is called the driver ant, and you've probably seen these on nature documentaries and stuff like that. They're a force. In summary, army ants are a force, and ants. I would argue ants in general are definitely a force of nature.
So I want to do the speed round with you.
Uh-oh, what's
That would
up?
be fun. Okay, so if you could say one insect and then one quick sentence why you chose that insect for each of these things. Cute, creepy, crazy, spooky, sweet, and sour. Let's start with cute, creepy, crazy. So what's the cutest? What's the creepiest? Or what, yeah, what's the cutest? What's the creepiest? What's the craziest?
Okay, cutest. I think just if this is a lightning round, off the top of my head is probably the blue death feigning beetle, which is I was mentioning it earlier, and people that poach them, they are adorable, and honestly, I can see why people want them as pets. They're very, very gentle and just kind of little gentle giants. Um, what's the next one? Creepy?
Creepy.
Creepy. Oh, this is kind of an obscure one, but if you look up bat louse or bat fly, they're even for me as an entomologist, I get like a when I see them. They're a type
That's
of
saying
fly.
something.
Yeah, they're a type of fly that lives in bat fur, basically, and they are morphologically extremely bizarre, and the way they move just kind of sends a shiver down your spine. um, what was the last one or the third one?
Crazy.
Crazy. Oh well, uh, so there's an ant called Dorymyrmex insanus, um, and I guess I'll pick that one for crazy because the species name is insanus. And I think they call it that because the way they move around as they're foraging is just very erratic. Like they have no purpose. They're just going crazy all over the place.
Okay, so the next three are spooky, sweet, and sour.
Spooky. Well, I think of so there's I think it's called Death's Head cockroach. It's not from here. I think it's maybe African. I could be wrong on that, but you can sometimes find it in pet stores. People sell them as pets, and it's a large cockroach that has a skull. It looks like a skull on the back of its head. So that's spooky, I guess. It's very Halloween oriented.
Yeah.
Um, and then what was sweet?
Mhm.
So
Sweet.
sweet would be honeypot ants,
Mm.
and this is another one you may have seen in a nature documentary. They're a species you can find in the desert, and their unique adaptation to surviving in the desert is some of the workers will be down in the nest and they'll hang on to the top of the tunnel, and then other workers will basically just feed them liquid like nectar, basically, and feed them and feed them and feed them, and then they engorge into like in some cases like the size of a marble, and they basically turn themselves into a living food receptacle, um, kind of like a little refrigerator, so that if food is scarce, they have these ants and they're still alive, just hanging there, that they can get food back out of.
How
And
do they how do they get the food back out of them?
so it's called trophallaxis. It's basically ants exchange food and other things by regurgitating it to one another, liquid substances. So that's how they do it.
Wow, so like baby birding.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
basically,
crazy,
yeah.
actually.
And indigenous people have talked about the ability to dig them up and pop them in your mouth like a sweet little snack. So I think that one fits the sweet category well.
Very interesting. Okay,
Indeed,
so
it does.
sour. What's sour?
I'm giving a lot of ant examples, but ants, many of them produce a chemical called formic acid, and it is a defensive acid that they spray if, they can either spray it on prey or if they're getting attacked, they'll release it. And it's a very sour, vinegary smell that is not very pleasant. So I think I'll go with that one.
Very cool. Thanks for playing that speed
Yeah,
round
that's
with
fun.
me. What
Great
is
speed
your
rounds.
what is your just overall favorite insect if you have one?
Oh man.
You're asking someone their
Oh,
favorite?
well, I guess what I should say, I have one species of parasitoid wasp that's named after me, because I helped
What?
discover it in Texas. It's named
Oh,
Orsema
cool.
hecoxii.
What is it named? Can you say that again?
Orsema hecoxii. So my last name is the species name.
How did you get that to be named after you? That's so cool.
So the lab I used to work in, me and one of my colleagues and friend did a research trip to Texas to basically just find um, as many of these wasps as we could. And it turns out one of these that we brought back was an undescribed species. Um, and my friend, as part of his PhD dissertation, described it into science as a new species, and he named it after me. So,
Oh, cool.
and just for the record, I didn't ask him to do that. He did it all on his own. I wasn't pressuring him. I didn't give him any bribes or anything.
Wow, that's really nice that he named it after you then.
Yeah,
That's a sweet story. I'm glad you shared that with us.
Yeah, what a cool story. That's awesome.
Congratulations, too. That's
yeah,
fascinating.
that's my claim to fame. I can retire now.
Yeah,
Hey,
you're
you left a legacy behind in
Yeah.
entomology. Something's named after you, right?
I tell people if they ever want an animal named after them, they should get into entomology because there's so much left to be discovered. Chances are you can make that happen.
Sure.
very cool.
Well,
That's awesome.
congratulations.
So you did a lot of studies on parasitic wasps?
Yeah, parasitic, parasitoid.
Okay,
Um,
so what is the difference between those two?
yeah, so parasitoid, I tell people to imagine the alien from the alien movies, and specifically the chest burster, when it pops out of the body. Um, Parasitoid wasps are pretty similar to that in the sense that they have one host that they parasitize, and then the host almost always dies afterward. So that's to contrast it from things like ticks and fleas and stuff, where a tick, excluding potentially some bad illnesses you can get from it, a tick isn't going to kill the host. It's going to hop off and do its thing. And fleas can hop from host to host. They're not usually, again, not going to kill the host. So it's a different type of parasitism, basically. And so when I say a parasitoid wasp, it generally refers to that one host dies at the end of parasitism. And parasitic wasps, they're, to me, one of nature's greatest secrets when it comes to nature education, because um, when you think of parasitic wasps, you might think of the tarantula hawk, right? Which is maybe more like a predator or something. Um, but how many other species of parasitic wasps can you name? Maybe a few. You have really big things like cicada killers that people sometimes see, which again, maybe not.
So, are cicadas considered wasps?
No, this wasp common name is a cicada killer because it goes after cicadas and kills them. Cicadas are actually a bug, a type of true bug, so to speak, which is a whole other thing I can get into. Um, I usually just tell people that all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs, if you want to use the term bug appropriately from an entomological perspective.
Where is the line there?
Between a bug and an insect.
Yeah.
So bugs specifically are from a specific, phylogenetic, not hate to use that term, a certain evolutionary group within all of insects that are called true bugs. And that includes things like bed bugs are a true bug, assassin bugs, cicadas, aphids, more broadly speaking. What are some common ones? Leaf hoppers, um, things like that, and a whole lot, many, many other species that most people don't really think about. Um, and this group is morphologically different. I mean, evolutionarily, they're their own distinct thing, but morphologically, they all have a specific um, morphological arrangement of mouth parts that gives them basically a piercing, sucking straw, which they drink fluids through. They don't have chewing mouth parts like many other insects.
So that's what's considered a bug.
Yeah,
Is that sucking, like almost like a fly, or that's
yeah.
okay.
You
And like
can
have
think of it kind of like a mosquito. Yeah, mosquitoes are actually a type of fly, so totally different group of insects. Um, but all true bugs have again, insect mouths are very weird, and we don't need to get into that. It's even confusing for me. They're not like us where we have, top teeth, lower teeth, and a tongue. They have, tongues, they have different appendages just for their mouths. They have jaws and just all this weird stuff. And different groups of insects have evolved different modifications of those mouth parts into, sometimes like a straw for piercing and sucking. Others have giant mandibles that can crunch through wood. And some species have no mouths at all as adults because they don't feed. So
So these parasitic wasps, are they considered bugs or insects? Or
they
both?
are not bugs, they are insects.
Okay.
Yes.
So tell us about those.
Okay. Um, so earlier I mentioned I think they're one of entomology's or entomological education's best kept secret, and that most people know they've heard of parasitic wasp before, and they think of maybe a tarantula hawk, but they have no idea the actual breadth evolutionarily of parasitoid wasps. Um, there are most of the species we probably haven't described yet because they're everywhere, and many of them are incredibly small. So I'm talking essentially microscopic adult wasp that there's really great images that have been published of two scale images of over here you have an adult wasp. It has wings, it has a head, it has an antennae and everything. And next to it is an amoeba and like a single celled organism. And the wasp is actually smaller than the amoeba. Um, and most of the parasitoid wasps out there are incredibly tiny. And so we don't really think about them. We don't see them, even though they're all around us almost always. And the reason they're all around us almost always is because there are so many parasitoid species that parasitize so many different other insects. So if you're in a place that has insects, you're going to have more than likely, or more likely than not, you're going to have parasitic wasps that are parasitizing those insects. And a lot of species are specific to just one host species, if that makes sense.
So those super small wasps
Mhm.
are then using other insects to be hosts.
Right. Yeah. So some of the very, very small ones will actually parasitize eggs of other insects. That's how small they are. They complete their entire life cycle within just the egg of a butterfly, for instance, which is already basically microscopic or close to being microscopic, very small.
And what is the effect on the host?
Death. Yeah. So remember, these are parasitoids. So this isn't always true, but usually the parasitism results in death of the host.
So,
So
for example, the tarantula hawk, when it, you know, paralyzes the tarantula and the babies are born, the tarantula does eventually die.
correct. Yeah.
It's a slow death, obviously,
Yeah. Slow and probably not very pleasant. Um,
but it
there,
always ends in death.
yeah. There are some cases. There's one type of wasp that goes after ladybird beetles or ladybugs, as people call them. They're not bugs, they're beetles. But um,
Oh, so a ladybug is considered a beetle.
Correct. Yeah. I usually call them lady beetles or ladybird beetles because they're not bugs. But ladybug is the more common name.
And
It's
so
kind of
beetles.
like calling a seagull, even though they're not technically a seagull. They're also land birds. It's kind
Oh,
of like
Right.
same,
But
same,
yeah,
like, I don't know if that analogy made sense.
from an ornithologist, I'm sure it does. Yeah.
so a beetle is also not considered a bug, but it is considered an insect.
That's right. Yeah. All bugs are insects, not all insects are bugs.
And
Um,
turtles too.
It's like all
yeah.
tortoises are turtle, or all turtles are tortoises, but not all tortoises are turtles. It's kind of like the same thing, like not all bugs are beetles, not all
Right.
beetles are
Yeah. Yeah.
bugs.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think I said that right, but we keep bringing that
I know
up on
what
the
you mean.
podcast and now
I
we're
got the
getting
spirit of
confused.
it.
Well, tortoises don't need that water element where turtles do. So that's the difference
Right.
there. But
But anyways, this ladybird beetle parasitizing wasp will actually turn the beetle into like a zombie. Um, and the wasp larvae will develop inside of the ladybird beetle and eat it while it's alive, right? And then when it's done developing, it'll burst out of it and then make a cocoon to develop into an adult. And the ladybird beetle acts like a zombie and it will actually stand guard over the developing wasp until it's done and emerges as an adult and flies away. And occasionally I've read sometimes those ladybird beetles can actually survive that and continue living after that, which would be a very traumatizing thing to experience. But that would just be an example of, a case where maybe not always it ends in death.
Oh my God. Okay, so I'm labeling these wasps as freaks then. They're turning these
I'm
beetles.
okay with that. Yeah. I would also argue they are a force of nature because they are very abundant. They're all around us. We usually just don't notice them. And they do exert um, noticeable pressures on insect populations. And we've actually used this to our advantage in modern agricultural systems. It's called biocontrol, where you can go online and you can order, raised wasps that are like these tiny little, size of a grain of sand. You can order a little cup that has, I don't know, 10,000 of them in it. And then you can release them into an agricultural field that has a pest problem. And these wasps are raised because they're known to go after that specific pest. And so we use them in organic agriculture as a way to control pest insects and not use a bunch of nasty, insecticides and chemicals.
it's like a
Wow.
nature-based solution, really.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like using burrowing owl on agricultural lands to keep rodents out.
Yeah.
Kind of same thing, right?
It's very smart and it can be very effective. You just have to, it's good to appreciate how much research goes into it before the release because you have to make sure you're not releasing a wasp that will go after everything, including the native things.
Oh.
Um, so a lot of, research and permission goes into that before you can't just go out there and start because these wasps come from more often than not the same place that the pest came from, which is usually not where you're currently at. Um, and introducing non-native species into an area comes with a lot of risk. So in order to alleviate that, there's a whole lot of research that goes into it first.
And on the topic of invasive species, I feel like this is the perfect through line to kind of discuss climate change a little bit and how we're seeing rising temperatures affect insects and also bringing in invasive species because that's definitely a side effect of climate change is introduce species into areas where they weren't previously found.
Mhm.
What does that relationship look like between native insects in the Coachella Valley and non-native? And where does climate change kind of fit in with that?
Yeah, so in the Coachella Valley, we definitely do have some non-native invasive insects. A good example is fire ants, specifically the red imported fire ant that I believe is from Argentina, and also the Argentine ant, which people in California are usually aware of because it's everywhere. Um, the, so those usually only occur in urban areas. And that's because they require more water than the otherwise extremely arid Coachella Valley can offer. Um, but there definitely are some, and they cause problems. Um, and I also, when I talk about fire ants, I like to point out that the desert has all kinds of native fire ant species as well. So I try not to villainize all fire ant species just because of that one bad one. Um, the climate change, I'm trying to think of an example of climate change directly influencing invasive species. I mean, there's the obvious, habitat modification that brings in new species, and agriculture brings in new species that shouldn't be there.
That's
And
what I imagine would be the biggest problem.
yeah, that's how a lot of insects get here is they're accidentally shipped in on agricultural plants or potted, nursery plants and that kind of stuff. Sometimes they're in food products and they're not realized. That's why, ideally there's entomologists that are watching products come through international borders and they're inspecting them to make sure that there's no invasive species coming in. Um, but climate change, generally speaking, does have a noticeable effect on many organisms, including insects. And one example I give, and this probably couples with climate change, as well as just rampant human development, is the Coachella Valley Jerusalem cricket, which is one of the endemic species, endemic meaning it's found nowhere else, found in the Coachella Valley. And historically, you could find it in, a much larger area than it's found today. Potentially, an area twice the size of where it's currently at, if not greater. And this is a species that is mostly active during the wetter, cooler months. So in the Coachella Valley area, most of the moisture comes in the winter. And otherwise, they're basically underground for the entire rest of the year, as far as we can tell. So they don't like really hot and dry temperatures. It's not ideal for them to be active. And what do we see in the Coachella Valley and other parts of the Southwest is hotter and drier temperatures lasting for longer periods of the year. And so that's not good. And so they exist on kind of a shallow elevation gradient. And what we found is that they've essentially disappeared from the lower elevations, which are the hotter and drier elevations. Whereas back at, early 1900s, you can find them all the way down to Palm Springs, Palm Desert. They're
Wow.
just from those areas. And another very obvious thing, if you go to that area, is that most of what was very nice sand dune desert habitat is now resorts and golf courses and stuff like that. So obviously that's not the ideal environment for
So
something.
development and changing temperatures is
Yeah.
causing them to retreat to higher elevations.
Yeah, that's likely part of studies are ongoing within this insect. I think there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done, and that goes for many insect species. There's all kinds of endemic species that don't get very much attention at all. And a lot of times they could be gone before we know it, and we missed our chance just because there isn't enough research going into those species.
Would you say that your field work, when you're studying Jerusalem crickets over a period of time, you have seen in your own observations a decline in abundance of these crickets in like a given study site?
Yes and no. So there are areas, I'm not going to say where, but there are areas that have, ever since I've been working on it and for many years before that, have been known to be like the center of activity. And it's like, if you want to see a cricket, you go here. They're doing well there. Their numbers are pretty stable. They're abundant, relatively speaking. There have been instances where I have a plot network that we use to monitor them. I visited at the beginning of the monitoring season, and I cannot find any of them. And from what I can tell, I can attribute that to a couple of things, both of which one is definitely caused by humans, and the other is arguably exacerbated by humans. The first one is that I went to my field site and I noticed that someone had been tampering with all of the things that I use to monitor them. Again, I'm trying to be a little bit vague here. Um, and they were doing it systematically. They knew where they were going, which is a little freaky to me. And basically, that entire field season, I didn't find a single Jerusalem cricket in that area, whereas normally I could find them very easily within a few minutes if I wanted to. And I'm worried that they were getting potentially poached, or, sometimes people out there have reptiles that they keep as pets. And this area where these crickets are at is a very popular herping spot. Herping meaning people that like reptiles go there and look for reptiles. It's possible that they saw these nice, big, juicy, fat crickets and they thought, oh, that would make a great meal for my pet snake or my pet lizard. The other option is that they may have poached them to keep as pets.
Why would someone want to poach them and keep them as a pet?
Good question. People do go and poach insects and sell them. I've seen some native species for sale at local pet stores. And a lot of times they're big species, which these are. They get very big. They're very charismatic and noticeable.
Jerusalem crickets are charismatic?
Yeah,
Oh,
if
that's
you see one,
interesting.
you'll remember it. Many people are freaked out by them. I think they're quite cute, but they're definitely memorable. Um, and the other, a lot of other times, size is and colors and that kind of thing makes them attractive. And if they last, if you can keep them as pets for multiple years, is another factor. I've seen darkling beetle species from our deserts that in captivity can last, maybe 8 years, which is pretty long for many insects.
That's a long life for
Yeah.
an insect.
And they're gentle, they're easy to feed, they're fun to look at, and so people take them as pets.
The beetles and the crickets?
Yeah,
Okay.
beetles are very common, so I doubt there's ever going to be any noticeable effect of poaching on their population. The Jerusalem crickets, on the other hand, not so much. They're already restricted and have all these pressures from invasive plants and climate change and now potentially poaching.
Are they
And
considered a threatened species or do they have any protections around them?
they're not listed at a state or federal level, but they are protected in what's called this is a really long name. I apologize. It's called the Coachella Valley Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan, or the CVMSHCP, which is a Coachella Valley wide conservation program that has had a lot of success in you know both doing research on endemic species and preserving their populations and the habitats they depend on. But so it is protected under that. There is some protections, which is good news.
That is
Um,
good news.
And we talk
but a
about
lot,
that in our episode with Colin Barrows. So um, if you're listening, go listen to that episode too.
yeah,
Uh,
Colin is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to basically anything Coachella Valley conservation related. So yes, I agree.
Well,
Go.
wasn't it his parents that kind of pioneered the multiple habitat
Yeah.
species plan? Yeah.
So actually, um, the main reason I met Colin in the first place is because I used to work for several years. I used to work for his dad,
Okay.
who is and was a very influential naturalist in the Coachella Valley, and really helped push forward a lot of the conservation measures that are currently in place that were in a lot of ways groundbreaking, um, and kind of set a standard for other conservation programs to follow.
How would you say this plan helps fight climate change and protect desert insects? I know you said it generally the Jerusalem cricket is protected under it. What else do you see as a benefit from this plan?
Climate
Ju-
change is a hard one,
yeah,
because it's a global thing. A conservation plan just in the Coachella Valley isn't going to be able to affect what people on the other side of the world are doing, or
sure.
even what the next city over is, or the next valley over is doing.
But I guess on a local level.
Yeah, locally. So getting back to the Jerusalem cricket, the other thing I noticed that could be affecting their populations is our unusual floods.
Ah,
And this other site, or a similar site, I went back one year and I noticed it had just been completely scoured, and there was no crickets around. And the sand that the cricket needs, the loose, dune sand, was gone, it was scoured away. And we're starting to suspect, and there's research that supports this, that climate change is producing more violent and more unpredictable storms that lead to these, once in 100-year flood events at more common intervals than we would normally see.
Mm.
And so stuff like that we can, observe, and we can start trying to think of ways to mitigate that. We're definitely in the early stages of that, I would say, but thinking just outside of the Jerusalem cricket, there's options like there's moving animals from one place to another place, which isn't ideal, but it is an option. Um, you know, Other
Sure.
protections from floodwaters.
We see that with desert tortoises, having to
Yeah,
translocate them
right.
from similar habitats to another.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not ideal, of course, but when the habitat is degraded and you're trying to save something, sometimes you don't have much of an option.
It's
Um,
better than not having any options at all.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Are
I
there
agree.
any sort of captive breeding programs with insects?
Um, so for it, different insects, I'm sure there are, again, there's so many insects across the world there. You
But is
can,
this an option that you could see maybe used for the Jerusalem cricket, especially because it's an endemic species?
yeah, I think it's definitely possible. The question is getting the funding and the necessary research to make that a reality, because we do not know very much about what goes on in the lives of Jerusalem crickets when they're underground for, 3/4 of the year. Um, if I recall correctly, we've never even seen them lay eggs. Like there's big gaps of knowledge, and that's not to say that people aren't out there trying. There's David Weissman at California Academy, who is a major expert on Jerusalem crickets and has done all these lab experiments to try to figure out how they communicate with one another and that kind of stuff. And that's definitely moving in the right direction, but we need more information. And I think to get that, funding needs to be there, of course. I hate to say that, but it's true. And we also need people that are interested in it, and which is, one of my hopes in talking to the public about insects is that it'll inspire continuing generations of people who do want to, you know, attack these problems. And especially moving into an era where we need to have more frank discussions about climate change and how things are happening quickly. Um, with that mindset, like thinking about clever solutions to these things, can we get the information necessary to rear them? Um, how do we stabilize our environments? How do we protect their environments and that kind of stuff? Um, so I guess that's a really long answer to saying it is possible, I would say. Currently, no one has done it, and we're missing some information we need in order to get there.
So it sounds like there's some catching up that needs to be done.
Mhm.
And specifically with poaching, I mean, this is complete news to me that um, insects are being poached. We talk a lot about poaching in this season with tortoises, and yeah, I'm just surprised to hear that there's also poaching going on with insects.
Mhm.
And obviously with poaching, with whether it be large mammals or reptiles, there's consequences to something like that. But I wonder if those same consequences apply when it comes to insects.
Oh yeah, I would say definitely, especially when you're dealing with something like the Coachella Valley Jerusalem cricket that already has such a tiny range. Someone can go in there and take 20 of them, and you think, oh, it's just 20 insects. That can't be that much. But with something that's, already facing such pressure from outside, that potentially can make a big difference. Especially, if you're going right into the middle of their prime habitat and just plucking them out there, at a time of year when they should be mating and reproducing and making the next generation, you're disrupting that as well. So, and these things have not been quantified yet for the species, but so I can't say for sure what the effects of that are, but it's pretty easy to imagine that there's got to be some negative consequences for that.
What would our world look like without insects then? If we can't quantify those impacts, where would we be without insects?
We would not be here. It'd be pretty much unrecognizable. The most noticeable difference would be that we wouldn't be here, probably. And
Why is that?
that's because,
We as in the human race wouldn't be here.
yeah, probably. I would think about the food we eat. We need vegetables and fruits and stuff, right? A large proportion of that is only there because there are insects to pollinate it. And so if we get rid of, and that's just not even talking about all insects, that's talking about just pollinators. If we get rid of those, then our food is gone. And so, humans couldn't be what they are today without their agriculture. And a lot of that agriculture depends on insects, whether or not we like to realize that. Um,
And what
and
do you do to help make people realize the importance that the role that they play?
basically just education from the ground up. I usually start by saying this is what an insect is. A lot of people don't know that. They think, what is a bug? Is a snail a bug? Is a spider a bug? Um,
Are those bugs?
they're not.
Okay.
So this is what I'm talking about. This is good. Spiders are arachnids. They're arthropods, which means what does it mean? Arthropod means like jointed limbs. And so, when you look at a spider leg or an insect, they have hard limbs and they have with flexible joints, basically. Um, they're related in that sense. Snails are different. They're all invertebrates, so very broadly speaking, they are related, but very different. Um, a lot of people just lump all that creepy crawly stuff into one category, and then that's the end of it. You don't think about it beyond that. You don't think about what they do in nature, the critical roles they play, not just for nature, but also for us.
In the
You
circle
don't
of
think about
life.
the diversity and how everything interacts and how, insects are so abundant and so diverse. If you were to take those out of any ecosystem, in most ecosystems, it would be changed forever and negatively changed. I would definitely argue.
So specifically in the Coachella Valley, since that's what the season is focused on, and obviously where you are, what would be the most negative impact if a specific species that might be a critical one in the area were to be eradicated?
So if I were to pick just one species, I would probably pick one of the harvester ant species.
Oh.
There's a few of them, but the California harvester ant, which if you're in the desert, most places you've seen them, they're pretty decent sized red and black ants. They're active during the day. They can sting very painfully. Harvester ants and ants in general are what a lot of people call ecosystem engineers, where they provide a lot of environmental services that people don't realize. And harvester ants are called harvester ants because they harvest seeds. That's their primary form of food. It's one of their ways they've adapted to survive in desert climates. They basically, when times are good and there's lots of seeds and plants around, they go out and they harvest thousands of seeds and they store them underground so that when times are bad, they have, these granaries that they can go into, like a pantry they can eat from. And so they exert pressure on plants through seed predation. They take seeds out of the system. And there's been some instances where, it's quantifiable. You can see how they change plant communities based on which seeds they prefer to take. Ants can dig massive nests underground, like meters deep. And those, nests have tunnels going this way and that. And some chambers are filled with dead matter. Some chambers are filled with seeds. And those nests in themselves have all kinds of benefits. They increase water infiltration into the soil when it rains, so the water gets into the soil easier. They increase aeration of the soil. All that organic matter they're pumping into the soil eventually rots and turns into fertilizer for plants and creates these big, like fertile islands where the ant nests once were. So they play a really big role, and they're very abundant too. You can hardly go anywhere in the desert and not see harvester ants. And so I think removing those from the system would be really catastrophic. And I like telling people about harvester ants because people don't like ants a lot of the times, especially ones that sting. Um, but they really are critically important.
And what about for wasps? Because I know for myself, I don't love wasps when I see them
Mm.
around. Their sting hurts worse than a bee. And with bees, they're pollinators. So you're kind of like, whoa, well, I know your role in the environment, but like what role do wasps play, like specifically in the Coachella Valley, like
Mhm.
that makes it so that, yeah, these should be around.
So when you say wasps that sting, it sounds like you're talking about like yellow jackets and hornets and the
Mhm.
ones that people typically fear, and potentially rightly so, because those ones can be aggressive. Um, so first of all, wasps are excellent predators. And, I tell people, as long as it's safe to do so and you're not allergic to wasps, having a wasp nest in your vegetable garden or near your vegetable garden can be a huge help because they will come in and they will take all the caterpillars and all the other stuff that's eating the vegetables. Um,
Oh,
Also, they are pollinators as well. They do visit flowers to get, that quick boost of sugar energy. Um, a lot of times they're hunting in order to feed their larvae, not necessarily for themselves. And many adult wasp species might actually prefer visiting flowers to get nectar. So wasps can be very important pollinators as well. Um, and again, there's all kinds of other things that are associated with wasps. There's other insect species that parasitize wasps or that live only inside of wasp nests, that kind of stuff. So if you get rid of the wasps, you're also getting rid of that inherent biodiversity that goes with it. Um, so yeah, wasps are hard to love, and I'll admit I love them, but I don't expect everybody else to love them. But I do think that I would say all insects are worthy at least of respect in that sense.
So what should somebody do if they see an insect in their house
Um,
or just around where they are and they don't necessarily want an insect around? What is your recommendation?
well, I always advocate for gently placing them outside. It can be pretty easy to do if you have a cup and something to slide under it. Um, a lot of times, the insects you find in your house don't want to be there. They just maybe accidentally came in and they'd rather be outside. Of course, then you get into things like cockroaches and termites and stuff, which, you have to admit they do
oof.
pose some actual problems. But in general, if it's safe to do so and you're comfortable with it, just put them outside and let them go about their day. Um, of course, if you see something out in nature, always best just to observe it from a safe distance. Um, Let it do its thing. If you happen upon a wasp nest, just leave it alone. um, Let the ants do their thing. Don't go rummaging around in their world. Just know that the ants are there and they're doing good environmental service. I think that once people understand how insects are important, they're more willing to let them exist in some proximity to themselves.
Well, what you just said about wasps is new information for me. I always just assumed that they didn't really have a point.
Right. And a lot of, things like mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are pretty hard to make a case for, right? There's a lot of
Deadliest,
problems.
literally the most deadliest animal
Right.
on the planet.
Yeah. And it's true. I'm definitely not saying we should all, praise mosquitoes and let them into our homes. They are a problem. They need to be addressed. At the same time, you can respect them. They're amazing creatures and they're amazing at what they do. Um, there's all kinds of different mosquito species. Some species of mosquitoes actually are predatory on other mosquito species that might be a medical problem. Um, there's also all kinds of different animals that eat mosquitoes and need mosquitoes, in order to sustain their lives. So even something as lowly as a mosquito does have an ecological place. Um,
As
you know,
does everything in the environment, right? Even if
Essentially, yeah.
as humans we may not see that and project our own perception on to insects, to spiders, whatever it is that we fear, snakes fall into that bucket, then we we don't see its value and its right for existing in its own world in the environment because we just don't understand it.
Mhm.
And it's really that knowledge piece that you can provide us with. And I hope our listeners can take that away that everything matters in the environment, including these insects.
Often, I get questions about what do these insects do for us, which getting a little philosophical, I always, or everything comes from an anthropogenic or, anthropocentric viewpoint, oftentimes. And I always like to say, well, you're asking me what do insects do for the world? What do humans do for the world? Like we cause some problems. I think it's pretty safe to say. Um, and I like to try to reframe things in that sense. Not everything is like has to come from the perspective of what can they do for us? How do they benefit us? If they don't have some direct benefit to us, then what are they worth? It's people need to, especially as we again move into this new age where we have much more severe and dire environmental concerns, we need to kind of move away from that anthropocentric mindset.
I agree. And embrace that, what I like to call ecocentric, where
Mhm.
we're placed in the environment with other species rather than at the top of the pyramid,
Exactly. Right.
where we can see ourselves as one, as whole with the insects, with birds and snakes. We're really not above them. And we have to remove that anthropocentric kind of viewpoint to really understand our connection and how we're all inherently part of this system that's suffering from our, human existence, right? Not that we're part of the problem. I mean, we are part of the problem, but we can also be part of the solution, right?
Right.
And that comes from understanding all walks of life. And I think we have a pretty good understanding of Coachella Valley insects after this episode.
Good.
I'm sure that we only not even scratch the surface though.
I know.
That is true, but it's a good introduction,
It's
I
a good
think.
introduction. Maybe we can do a part two for our next season.
Yeah.
I'd love to do that. Yeah.
We would too. This was such a great conversation, Scott.
I always like to ask these type of questions because I work in the animation industry. But what do you think about A Bug's Life? Is that one of your favorite movies?
Yeah, actually, you hit the nail on the head with that one. I watched that many times as a kid. It's been a while since I've seen it as an adult, but
Yeah.
I really like there are little details in it that you can tell that they, actually thought about real bugs when they were making the movie. One of my favorites is the little pet aphid that the queen has.
Yeah.
And, because ants are known to tend aphids kind of like, pets, or some people see it as almost like cattle, where the aphids secrete honeydew, a sweet substance that the ants like to drink, and then in exchange, the aphids get protection from things that want to eat them. So that's always the one I remember as a cute little aphid pet.
Yeah. I love that you think that it's pretty accurate in terms of the stuff that they put in
I
it.
mean,
Sort of.
yeah, there's some artistic was it artistic license that was taken, but I could tell what they were going for, and I appreciate that.
That's great. What do you think about other animated movies like Ants and the Bee Movie?
I haven't seen the Bee Movie. I refuse to see it.
I get it.
I remember ants being pretty bizarre and
Yeah.
it not very true to reality in any way. Um, that one has been probably even longer that since I've seen it than A Bug's Life. But
Yeah.
I think if there's any, mainstream animated film to do with insects, I think A Bug's Life is a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Um,
Love that.
think, yeah, definitely not James and the Giant Peach. That one has
Oh,
some.
James and the Giant Peach. Good one.
Those ones are very bizarre, but
I was playing a game with some friends this weekend and we brought up the James and the Giant Peach.
yeah, that
It was
movie's
a group of animation people, so
it's a beautiful movie, but it was very creepy to watch as a kid.
that one's a little bit creepier for sure.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen James and the Giant Peach.
You'll have to watch it and let me know what you think.
Yeah, I think it's worth a watch.
Yeah.
Not
I'll
just
give it a
because there's bugs in it, but just because it's a pretty unique movie.
I'll give it a watch. And I wonder if maybe for It's a Bug's Life, if they hired like an entomologist or
They definitely do their research.
yeah, if it
Mhm.
was pretty accurate or like you saw some like reflections of real time, like real bug things, then
Yeah,
maybe they hired someone who actually knew what they were talking about.
wouldn't surprise me. And even just, some of the models of the insects, how they were modeled, look more or less realistic. There's always little gripes like, oh, flies are supposed to have two wings and everything else has four wings and that kind of little stuff. And I think they got it pretty decent. Again, within the uh, expectations of artistic liberty.
I work with the director of It's a Bug's Life, and I can definitely tell you that research was done. He is very thorough in his research for his animated films. So,
Well, it shows.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious now. I'm going to try to start thinking about other things I've seen because there's got to be other stuff out there
I know, right?
that has bugs in it. But
A Bug's Life, though, that's pretty iconic to
yeah,
being
very
a
well done.
child
Yeah.
and loving that. Yeah. And we'll always bring back that piece of what inner child moment led to your destiny today or
Mhm.
your interests today. And I always come back to movies.
Yeah.
It's a good way to get connected with what you think you could do.
Yeah. And movies like A Bug's Life really just being able to shrink down into that world. And that always really fast. Another movie I really liked was Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I don't know if you've seen that one, but similar concept. Um, just like you know, I really wanted to be in their world and actually experience it. And A Bug's Life did a good job at that, from a kid's movie perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. There aren't really many movies that take you to that ground level of like
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
happening on like a not a molecular level, but like a micro zoomed in level.
Yeah.
Well, stay tuned for the movie I'm working on.
Ooh,
Ooh.
Yeah. I
is
can't
it
say
a
much, but
secret?
I can't say
Okay.
much, but and also the title is still in works, but I can tell you that it is going to launch in March, and I will be sure to let everyone, our audience, our planet people know. And also I'll definitely let you know, Scott, when it comes out because I
I'm
think
excited.
you'll appreciate it.
Yeah.
There's one part I know for sure that you'll appreciate.
I'm going to assume there might be some insects in it,
Yeah.
since you said that.
Awesome. Well, in the future, if I'm ever working on an animated film and we're talking about insects, I know who to go to. So,
Yeah, please. I love that kind of stuff.
That'd be awesome if you could help with that effort one day, do more communication stuff about
Yeah,
insects.
I'd love that. It's again, it gets back to this idea of trying to, how do you take insects and make it more accessible to a wider audience? And like you said, Natalie, the animation and movies are a great way to do that.
yeah.
Totally. Is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with that we didn't mention, or maybe perhaps an environmental quote or things that leave you hopeful in this line of work?
I did look up a quote. Let me bring it up because I cannot memorize quotes. From one of my favorite authors, David Quammen, and his book Song of the Dodo, which I would recommend. It's a book about biogeography and extinction. And his quote, "The song of the dodo, if it had one, is forever unknowable because no human from who we have testimony ever took the trouble to sit in the Mauritian forest and listen." And I think that's a great quote for many reasons, and especially in entomology, because a lot of people just don't take the time to actually look and watch and learn about insects. Um, they don't think, just like the dodo, maybe they got to Mauritius and they didn't think much of it. And then before they knew it, it was gone. And now we'll never know more about it. And unfortunately, insects are species are going extinct and they could follow the way of the dodo, where before we even know it, they're gone and we'll never know what their, so to speak, song was like.
I love that because there's so many undiscovered insects out there too. And like you were saying, we don't know if our impacts have,
Mm.
made it so that they don't exist anymore. And then especially with this Jerusalem cricket and how it's only in one place, like you guys are really taking the time to understand them and your own studies and sounds like other people's studies as well to, try to keep them in their environment. Love that.
Yep. We're doing what we can, but we always need more help, especially from future generations.
Well, thank you for all the work that you're doing with insects and for sharing your stories on the show today.
Thank you. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. All right, anxiety into action.
So my anxiety into action for this episode kind of relates back to what I was mentioning in the intro about my breath of fresh air with crickets. I feel like that was really my big takeaway for this episode, was just the theme around crickets and the fact that they are actually poached from the wild to be used as pets, like take-home pets. And so we see this actually a lot with snakes too. Snakes are poached from the desert. Poached means that they were illegally taken without correct permits, and they shouldn't be removed from their environment, basically. We see this a lot with plants and cactus in the desert as well. So this is a common theme that I feel like I'm learning more about during this season is the illegal trade of pets and poaching of animals from the wild. So that really it just really makes me feel some type of way like that. I hate that for these animals, right? That they're being extracted from their environment when they already have so many other pressures that they face from climate change, habitat destruction, all of these things that make it even more difficult for these animals to survive in already extreme arid desert environment. And so my thought on this was if you are like the action component to this anxiety piece, and my thoughts on this was that if you are going to look for animals in the desert, it's, if you're going to look for reptiles, it's called like herping, or maybe you're going to look for bugs, just make sure that you are keeping that information private. Avoid using geotags. If you're posting photos, people don't need to know the exact coordinates and where you are. Just keep it to yourself if you are going to share, because that will protect these animals from like overexposure. The internet really has the power to like do that, is blow up, sacred spaces. And these spaces are often where delicate and threatened wildlife are trying to exist. So avoid geotags. Don't poach animals from the wild. Don't poach cactus. Don't poach bugs. All of it. Just let nature be.
Yeah, I think that your advice is really great and not one that I would think about because I think a lot of times when we go to really cool places and then we post about it, we just like kind of haphazardly without thinking, just put the location where we're at. And I think, especially something with poaching, it feels like really helpless. Like there's nothing you can really do because it's somebody else's actions. But something as simple as just keeping, your location private or maybe, if there's a very specific landmark in your photo, like think twice about posting that because somebody could identify it with that landmark. And I know that we all like to post all of our content, but sometimes the lives of these other living things are a little more important. So
totally agree with you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Planet People. We are thrilled to have you as part of our community of wildlifers who care about protecting the planet for future generations to enjoy.
We hope that by listening, you feel inspired to connect with nature and become a steward of the planet by getting involved and taking action with your local community conservation organizations. Until next time, stay positive, Planet People.
This episode was produced by Natalie Jean Sybil, Coral Carson, and Hugh Carr. Directed and edited by Coral Carson. Theme song by Hugh Carr under the artist name Flama. Thank you, team.